This week in indie horror, I've got horror from across the globe. I've got Japanese body horror, Indonesian ghosts, Serbian vampires, and much, much more. So strap in and listen to me murder all of these foreign names. Let's start binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. The Sound of Summer is new on DVD, Blu-ray from Unearthed Films. It's written by a guy named Guy. The dog days of summer seem endless for a young barista, but when she makes fun of an odd man who comes into her coffee shop, she believes her skin is breaking out with bug bites, and he's the cause of it. Though her doctor says it's all in her head, the young woman begins scratching her body uncontrollably, leading to very gory results. Meanwhile, the odd man, dubbed the Cicada Man, may actually be behind the woman's psychosis and has devious plans of his own. The Sound of Summer is a strange descent into madness from Japan. I guess I can say I learned a little something here, namely that, like everywhere else I've lived in the Midwest, Japan seems to have an abundance of cicadas singing their screechy song in the latter days of summer. Nice to know the nonstop annoyance of the cicada, or locusts as I called them as a kid, isn't just a regional thing. I wouldn't call The Sound of Summer one of the most sophisticated of stories. It takes great leaps in logic in order to get to its gory climax, and really has very little reasoning beyond the fact that the Burisma made fun of the wrong eccentric man. The lead, Shinya Hankawa, isn't very fleshed out as a character, and the psychosis she experiences isn't delved into much at all, mainly because the doctor she visits is by far the worst doctor I've seen portrayed in film, as he seems to not notice that this patient is literally tearing her skin off in clumps. But when she says she's having sleeping trouble, he has no issues doling out some sleeping pills. But The Sound of Summer isn't a movie bothered by realism. It's a film for the gorehounds out there. It's not about deep meaning, though there might be a little moral messaging going on about making fun of the wrong people. It's about the gore and how realistic it looks. Unearthed Films is a company specializing in that type of film. It's for those who miss the days of practical effects and how far they can go while still looking uncomfortably real. And in The Sound of Summer, the effects sure do look as authentic as the barista tears her skin off, probes her orifices, and pulls out chunks of flesh that she believes to be cicada particles. Eventually, she just tears herself apart. A while back, films like Contracted, Contracted 2, and Thanatomorphos were released as a comment about the crisis in healthcare, where people refuse to go to the doctor because they don't have the money or don't want to spend the money on whatever ails them. It's about the fears that we all have of the unknown put against the healthcare crisis. I don't think The Sound of Summer is about all of that, though. I think The Sound of Summer is much more literal, illustrating a specific psychosis and taking it to a gory, extreme end. Other than that, there's not much to this over-the-top gory movie. The plot plods along, the acting is not great, the sound of the cicadas and all of the tearing of flesh is exquisitely creepy as all get out, but the dialogue sounds are barely audible. I will say that the director, someone named Guy, captures close-up shots of the cicada with a lot of skill, and there are some sequences where vines begin growing through the barista's apartment walls that make for some fun DIY special effecting. Still, I can't give The Sound of Summer much of a recommendation, as I want more to a movie than just realistic and gory effects. PIGLADY is new on digital download on Amazon and Apple TV from Gravitas Ventures. It's directed by Adam Fair and written by Adam Fair and Alex C. Johnson. An eccentric woman lives on the edge of a town raising pigs, which would be fine if not for the fact that occasionally she likes to go out and kill people and make pork chops out of them. 4 pretty people decide to take a nice cabin vacation for the weekend on the land next to the pig lady's property, making them next up on the slaughter block. Damn it if I wasn't intrigued when I caught the preview of PIGLADY. There's something about pigs and horror that makes me immediately interested, as films like Hannibal, Motel Hell, and of course Pigs are films I can return to time and time again and still enjoy them. Turns out PIGLADY isn't really a good movie. It's roughly put together, scantily written, and moderately acted, but there's a charm to this movie I just can't deny. I like the little details used throughout PIGLADY, such as the fact that we never full-on see the PIGLADY's face. There are hints that she's probably not the most attractive damsel in town, but aside from being a little big-boned, she seems to be relatively normal. Still, never showing her face and going the Charlie Brown adult route gives her the kind of aura that immediately makes her ominous and frightening. The filmmakers attempt to do the Michael Myers thing where the PIGLADY is standing in the background and the viewer can see her through a window or doorway, but the hapless victims never do. I also really like the fact that the pigs are constantly roaming around in the periphery, suggesting that the PIGLADY is there watching them in the shadows, even when we don't see her, and is being followed by her gaggle of porkers, stalking her prey. These little details make for an interesting villain. Unfortunately, the movie around the PIGLADY is flawed, beginning with the editing. There are some very strange and off-timed edits to PIGLADY, as if it were edited by someone who really doesn't have a lot of experience with editing films. I get what the director was going for, but the scene-to-scene transitions just didn't work, making everything feel like a random kidnapper's note put together with different fonts that don't work well together. On top of that, the motivation of the PIGLADY is foggy. She just starts killing everyone, and while the local police are suspicious of her behavior, she really could have gone on killing randos and not been caught forever. Instead, she endangers her house, home, and business simply because the vacationers are in her area. Her rampage on the group really just made no sense, as they seemed to treat her with respect when they meet her earlier in the movie, and really did nothing to incur her wrath. The acting is okay for this type of low-budgeter. Sure, some of the characters are annoying as all get out. There's a gung-ho Marine know-it-all who never shies away from giving his macho take on any issue. There's the forced conflict between the two women of the group out of nowhere, only to end immediately after with hugsies. These characters serve their function as fodder for the PIGLADY, but aren't really well realized. PIGLADY turns out to be pretty gory. Of course there's cannibalism, there are butcher scenes, there is some weird sex between the PIGLADY and a drugged-up drifter, all of them looking more realistic than sensational. PIGLADY isn't anything I'd recommend to anyone but the hardcore and grungy fan of slashers. There's an air of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Friday the 13th Part 2, as PIGLADY has an altar filled with pig and human parts. There's also a weird ladder sequence with a little baby and a person wearing a pig head. I just wish the film could have spent as much time on the fundamentals like editing, characterization, and pacing as they did developing the creepiness of the PIGLADY character. It's all very piggy and sustained my attention, but barely at that. Death Knot, aka TALI Mati, is new streaming on Tubi and is available on DVD, Blu-ray from Well Go USA Entertainment. It's directed by Cornelio Sunny and written by Ike Klose and Cornelio Sunny. When their estranged mother takes her own life, a brother and sister return to the small village where they grew up to take care of the funeral and the house she left behind. Upon arriving, they find out the village has outcasted their mother as a witch and blame her for a series of hangings that have occurred throughout the village. Though they scoff at the notion their mother is anything but a strange person and possibly a bad mother, the siblings find themselves swept up in the hysteria with angry villagers at their door and strange visions haunting their dreams. Hailing from Indonesia, Death Knot is another curse-style film centering on taking your own life, specifically hanging, which seems to be all the rage in Asian countries. Reminiscent of the tepid The Forest from a few years ago, and scores of other films dealing with the ominous forest in Japan that has become legendary for the large amount of hangings occurring there. Death Knot has some very ominous scenes, such as the opener where the mother hangs herself and then diabolically looks at the camera. There are numerous scenes, such as this, throughout the film, where tense lead-ups and strange sounds make for some good moments of raw suspense. The film also sports some good acting from its cast. The three leads, Denajar Mesu Ayu, Morgan Oye, and Widika Darish Sidmore, are likable as they try to cope with the loss of their mother and deal with the stigma the town has assigned to their family. For the most part,
These guys do a good job conveying some high drama, which Death Knot has in abundance. Maybe too much, as the movie could have done with a little more action and a whole lot more scares. For the most part, this feels like a drama with supernatural elements more than a straightforward horror movie. Yes, things do get dire in the last act, but there's an awful lot of moping around the house before anything truly substantial occurs. Films like last year's The Medium do a good job of dealing with loss, shame, tribalism, and roles in small communities in Asia, but the abundance of slow parts are going to be a hard pill to swallow for those used to faster-paced films. The last act does end with quite a whopper of a tragedy, and I wish the epic scope would have been more incorporated into the story rather than simply suggested as a final image for the movie. I think if more was focused on having the family deal with the angry town is a much more compelling story than simply dealing with the loss and picking up the pieces after the estranged parent's death. That's been done to death in both American and international films lately. It's kind of getting old. Death Knot isn't going to blow you away, but I do feel there are moments of real terror director-writer Cornelio Sunny achieves. The horrifying sounds and strange images that are played with work well, but the all-too-familiar storyline, paired with the extended time spent centering on the malaise of coping with death, overpowered these scenes quite a bit. Vampir is new streaming on Shudder. It's written and directed by Branko Tomovic. After witnessing a crime, HRANA, played by writer-director Branko Tomovic, leaves London and moves to a small cottage in Serbia to take the role as caretaker of a cemetery. It seems like a simple job, but proves to be anything but as the locals begin acting strangely, especially when the sun sets. Vampir is a very moody and atmospheric film. It submerges the viewer into this strange environment filled with strange people doing strange things, with its lead, Tomovic, acting as a sort of blank slate for all of this oddness to bounce off of. It really does allow the viewer to experience the strangeness up close and personal. The townsfolk, with their somber, expressionless faces and black clothing, lurk around Arnaut's new home, and as his stay in the small village grows longer, one can understand why Arnaut's sanity is waning. This is a descent into madness tale, and for those who like a thorough and believable descent, this one works. One of the issues is that there really isn't a lot going on. I mean, there are definitely things happening behind the scenes, but since we're told this tale from the perspective of the protagonist's POV and really are not clued into the reasoning behind all of the weirdness until the last act, it makes for a very long time sitting and watching Arnaut walking through this village and sitting in his house. It doesn't make for the most riveting of movies and feels more like an art-housey meditative film that is more concerned with the immersion of the viewer than entertaining them every second of the time. I did feel this immersion, but I can't say I wasn't bored a time or two. Props to Branko Tomovic for doing the heavy lifting in Vampir, as he wrote, directed, and starred in the movie. While I feel the director was able to provide some rich atmosphere and some terrifying scenes that may or may not be nightmares, I do feel this somber, occasionally silent film is underwritten. I feel the conversations Arnaut has with the village priest as his sanity wanes worked, but these conversations are few and far between. And while I'm sure he's a great guy, Tomovic proves not to be the most charismatic of actors. He just kind of schlubs around. He's obviously carrying a heavy burden, but aside from a few scenes where Arnaut finally breaks down and gives in to the pressure, he really doesn't emote a lot, making him a rather boring person to follow for an hour and a half. But the biggest issue of this film is that it spends the entire runtime hinting that there is something wrong, that there's something dangerous in the shadows of this small village. The entire movie has Arnaut questioning his sanity as the people act weird around him, and it all leads to a big revelation at the very end. The thing is, that big revelation is the title of the damn movie. I mean, The Sixth Sense had a nice ambiguous title, but I'm sure if it were called Ghost Detective Bruno, the ending might not have been as powerful. Because the film is called Vampir, you're waiting the entire movie for the vampire to show up, and you know what happens in the last reel? Spoiler alert, a vampire shows up. I just wish the film would have been a bit more creative with the title. It would have made the ending resonate all the more. I seem to have found an awful lot wrong with Vampir, but I do want to stress that this was an immersive little film, placing the viewer into a strange culture well and soaking in the oddity of this environment. Vampir succeeds in that aspect, even though it has many other things wrong with it. Repulse, aka HRANA ZLOMU, is new streaming on Screambox. It's written and directed by Emil, Krizka. Repulse is a weird little number. It takes place over the span of about 2 days, telling two tales about two families. But if splitting this movie into two narratives focusing on two families isn't odd enough, Repulse also tells these tales in a non-linear way, each scene telling the story a little earlier or a little later in the narrative, both getting closer to a chance encounter between the two storylines. So while there are all kinds of other messed up things happening here, writer-director Emil Krizka makes it a challenge to follow narratively, especially if you aren't paying attention. I think because these two stories are so simple on their own, it makes for a movie that isn't going to lose attentive viewers. Repulse plays with the linear narrative we often take for granted. Telling these stories in a straightforward fashion would have been quite bland and not really given the climax of each storyline a chance to resonate as they did. I'm being vague to avoid spoilers because these two tales are pretty simple. One narrative follows an inattentive husband in a loveless marriage who comes home to find a man in his wife's bed. The other is about an abducted woman being held by a man-child who wears animal masks and his equally twisted mother who likes to watch. While the latter family is very disturbing on the surface, especially since it seems the abducted woman has lived with the mother and son for quite some time, and some very disturbing things have occurred in that time, the first story about the loveless marriage proves to be equally strange, with a quieter, no less destructive conflict going on. I guess if there's a theme going on here, it's the nihilistic view that everyone is messed up in their own way. Sure, everyone doesn't wear a bird mask while trying to procreate with a prisoner while one's mother is watching and cheering it all on, but the way the husband refuses to touch his wife, even to the point of wearing leather gloves, is pretty messed up as well. They're just two different extremes. One polite and distant, the other brash and invasive. That's at least what I got from Repulse. It's quite the disturbing little number that I saw days ago and can't seem to shake. On top of the odd narrative choices and strange characters, Repulse also has very little dialogue, relying on facial expressions, close-ups, and broad actions to tell the entire tale. Though all of this narrative cross-cutting might have rang pretentious in the wrong hands, it surprisingly works here, as I found both tales to be intriguing, as well as when the two narratives collide. At least I can say that Repulse is unlike anything I've seen in quite a while, which is something I can't say about 90% of the films that I usually see. Finally, we have Brightwood. It's new on demand and digital download from Cinephobia Releasing. It was directed and written by Dane Elcar. A couple on the edge of divorce, played by Dana Berger and Max Mortendijk, bicker through a morning run only to find themselves in a time loop they can't get out of surrounding a lake called Brightwood. Brightwood feels like a lost Twilight Zone episode. I miss movies like this where weird shit happens and no time is wasted investigating why. The couple who find themselves in this time loop are regular people. They aren't scientists or physics majors. They're just a normal couple with normal couple problems. There's not some big revelation where we find out why this couple is in this loop. It just happens, and the fun is seeing these normal people react to this very abnormal situation. Most likely conceptualized and made during the pandemic, the film stars only two people as they run this endless lap around the lake. I'm sure this film is inspired by couples who were forced to cohabitate for an extended amount of time during the pandemic, and all of the uncomfortable horrors that comes from that. Both Dana Berger and Max Mortendijk are strong actors, supporting every twist and turn they uncover with fun banter, barbed criticisms of one another, and quirky humor. For example, once they made it around the lake, the couple encounter another version of themselves just beginning their run, and the biggest takeaway Mortendijk has is that he didn't know how bad his male pattern baldness has become. It's moments like this that really work in making this couple, who spend the entire time arguing with one another in the opening 15 minutes, into likable, identifiable characters. Both actors are strong enough to make the concept work, even as the perspective shifts from one pairing of the couple to another. Most of the time travel and multiple universe crap makes my eyes glaze over. Many films get too caught up in the rules and the physics minutiae. Not so for Brightwood. This is a ground-level sci-fi horror done on a scale that never exceeds its budget. Director and writer Dane Elcar really has achieved something special with this film. I love the depths the story goes in terms of what these two desperate people will do to themselves and each other in order to find the way out of this endless loop. And the ending was truly unexpected. I highly recommend this little sci-fi horror movie that works big time.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside